The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, is one of the most iconic and defining moments in the history of warfare. It marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars and sealed the fate of one of the most brilliant and controversial figures in European history, Napoleon Bonaparte. To tell this story in a way that captivates and engages, we need to weave a narrative that brings the characters, the strategies, and the emotions of the day to life. Let's embark on a journey back to 1815, where the world stood on the brink of change. Napoleon Bonaparte, once the Emperor of France, had been exiled to the remote island of Elba in 1814 after his forced abdication. Yet, Napoleon's ambition was a fire that couldn't be extinguished so easily. In February 1815, he made his escape from Elba and returned to France, a move that shocked the world. With his arrival, he reignited the fervor of his followers and rallied an army to his cause. The French people, disillusioned by the Bourbon monarchy's restoration, embraced Napoleon as their leader once again. But the rest of Europe was not so keen on Napoleon's return. The powers of the Seventh Coalition, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, were determined to stop him before his reign could begin again. They knew that Napoleon's military genius could not be underestimated. Thus, a new war, which would be his final conflict, loomed large on the horizon. As Napoleon prepared for his return to the battlefield, the coalition scrambled to organize its forces. The stage was set for a confrontation, a grand battle that would ultimately decide the fate of Europe. Napoleon was never a man to back down from a challenge, especially when he felt the odds were against him. He was a master tactician, known for his boldness and his ability to read the battlefield like few others. By 1815, his army, though smaller than in his earlier campaigns, was still formidable. It was composed of veterans who had fought in Napoleon's previous campaigns, and they were fiercely loyal to their emperor. His plan was simple yet audacious. He intended to divide and conquer the enemy forces before they could combine into a united front. The French forces would first deal with the British, led by the Duke of Wellington, and then focus on the Prussian army commanded by Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. Napoleon knew that timing was everything, and that the success of his strategy hinged on quick, decisive action. He was gambling everything on this one final battle. If he could defeat the British and the Prussians before they could link up, he believed he could restore his empire and maintain control of France. The battle would take place near the small village of Waterloo in modern-day Belgium, just south of Brussels. The terrain, the weather, and the morale of his troops would all play crucial roles in the outcome. By the evening of June 17, 1815, the armies had assembled near Waterloo. The French army numbered around 73,000 men, while the combined forces of the British and their allies, including the Dutch and Belgian troops, amounted to roughly 6,800 soldiers. The Prussians, led by Blücher, were also on the move, although they were still some distance away. Napoleon's troops were positioned on a ridge, and the battlefield was covered in heavy rain that had turned the ground into a quagmire. This would prove to be an important factor, especially for the cavalry and artillery. The mud would slow movement and reduce the effectiveness of Napoleon's traditional tactics, which relied heavily on speed and maneuverability. The first moves of the battle began early on the morning of June 18th, when Napoleon ordered a bombardment to soften up the enemy positions. The French artillery opened fire on the British lines, sending plumes of smoke and dirt into the air. Wellington's troops, however, stood firm, knowing that the main battle would soon follow. Wellington, the British commander, had prepared well. He had positioned his men behind a series of strong defensive positions on the ridges and in the sunken lanes, which would make it difficult for the French to break through. He had also positioned his troops in such a way that he could shift them quickly, depending on where Napoleon's attacks came. The British soldiers, though tired from marching and the rain, were seasoned veterans, ready for the challenge. As the French artillery continued its barrage, the ground shook and the tension in the air was palpable. Napoleon knew that the battle could not be won with artillery alone, so he shifted his focus to the infantry. Around 11:30 a.m., he launched his first major attack on the British right flank, near the village of Hougoumont. The attack was a fierce and bloody one, with French infantry attempting to break into the village, but the British defenders, though outnumbered, held their ground. They fought with the tenacity and courage that would later become legendary. Simultaneously, Napoleon sent his cavalry charging forward in a bid to overrun the British lines. The French cavalry, led by Marshal Ney, rode furiously towards the British infantry, but the mud slowed them down. They were met with a devastating counterattack as British infantry squares formed and fired deadly volleys at the oncoming horsemen. The cavalry was forced to retreat, their charges in vain. Meanwhile, the Prussians, under Blücher, were marching toward the battlefield. Napoleon knew he had little time before their arrival, and he needed to break the British lines quickly. He ordered a second, more concentrated assault on the center of Wellington's forces. The French infantry advanced with determination, but the British held firm, the mud and the wet conditions making it difficult for either side to make decisive progress. Blücher's forces were arriving. Napoleon, realizing that his time was running out, ordered a final all-out assault on the center of the British line. It was now or never. Napoleon's Imperial Guard, the elite of the French army, moved forward with all the strength they could muster, a last-ditch effort to end the battle in his favor. But Wellington, ever the tactician, was ready. As the French Imperial Guard advanced, the British soldiers unleashed a devastating volley of fire, and the Guard began to falter. The British line held firm, and then, at the same moment, Blücher's Prussians arrived on the field. The French army was now caught between two forces, and the weight of the battle began to fall heavily against them. By late afternoon, the tide had fully turned against Napoleon. His army, exhausted and overwhelmed by the arrival of the Prussians, began to crumble. The once feared Imperial Guard, broken and retreating, symbolized the end of Napoleon's reign. Napoleon attempted to rally his troops, but it was clear the battle was lost. His forces began to retreat, and the British and Prussian armies closed in. The French, who had once been masters of Europe, were now in full retreat. By dusk, the battle was over. The sound of gunfire had ceased, and the once proud French army had been decisively defeated. Napoleon's fate was sealed. He fled the battlefield, and within days, he would once again be exiled. This time to the island of St. Helena, where he would spend the final years of his life in captivity. The Battle of Waterloo was a turning point, not just for France, but for all of Europe. The defeat of Napoleon meant the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the restoration of the old order in Europe. The Bourbon monarchy was reinstalled in France, and the political map of Europe was redrawn at the Congress of Vienna, with the major powers working to ensure that something like Napoleon's rise would never happen again. For Napoleon, Waterloo marked the end of a legendary era of military campaigns and ambition. His name would forever be etched into history, but not as the emperor who reshaped Europe, but as the man who was finally undone by his own ambition. For the British and Prussians, it was a moment of triumph, the culmination of years of struggle against the man who had threatened the very fabric of Europe. Wellington, who would become a national hero in Britain, and Blücher, whose Prussian forces played a decisive role in the battle, would both be remembered as two of the key figures who brought about Napoleon's downfall. But for all the glory they earned, the true cost of the battle was in the lives lost. Tens of thousands of men from both sides who fought and died for causes they believed in, and whose names would never be remembered. Waterloo may have been Napoleon's final defeat, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter for Europe. The battle was fought in the name of empire, but it was also a testament to the resilience of nations and the enduring power of the human spirit. Even in defeat, Napoleon's legacy lives on, not just in the history books, but in the way he changed the Battle of Waterloo became a symbol of the end of an era. It was a clash of empires, ideals, and destinies, with the fate of nations hanging in the balance. The echoes of the battle would resonate throughout history, from the political upheavals that followed to the lessons learned about the fragility of power and the consequences of unchecked ambition. Waterloo may have been Napoleon's final defeat, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter for Europe. The battle was fought in the name of empire, but it was also a testament to the resilience of nations and the enduring power of the human spirit.